The chamber was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the air recyclers and the faint buzz of hollow panels illuminating the polished obsidian floor. The grand hall of the United Earth Strategic Defense Council, designed to inspire unity, now felt suffocating under the weight of interstellar tension. Every breath seemed to echo against the towering crystalline walls, and the faint metallic tang of recycled air lingered on the tongue. Ethan Grayson adjusted the stiff collar of his formal jacket, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders like a leaden cloak. He stood at the center of the council chamber, surrounded by representatives from Earth's fractured nations, their faces a mosaic of determination, fear, and resignation. At the far end of the chamber, the Zorithan envoy stood motionless, his presence radiating menace. The envoy, Supreme Commander Scarus Valtor, towered above the humans. His armor shimmered like molten steel, shifting hues as he moved, and his deep-set eyes burned with cold disdain. The alien's voice cut through the stillness like the strike of a blade, his translator rendering his guttural, clicking tones into sharp, clipped English. "Humans," Valtor began, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Your chaos is a blight upon the galaxy. Your undisciplined existence threatens the harmony we have cultivated for eons." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he held his tongue. He could feel the gazes of the council members drilling into his back. This wasn't just a diplomatic meeting, it was a trial, and humanity stood accused. Valtor took a measured step forward, his clawed feet clicking against the obsidian floor. "You are not creators of progress, but harbingers of entropy. The Zorithan Empire has judged you unworthy of coexistence. Therefore, we offer you a single merciful option: surrender." The room bristled with tension, a collective intake of breath, as Valtor's words hung in the air like a guillotine. Ethan stepped forward, the soles of his boots striking the floor with deliberate defiance. He squared his shoulders, his eyes locking with Valtor's. "With all due respect, Supreme Commander," Ethan said, his voice steady, "humanity has faced extinction before and survived. We may be chaotic, but that chaos has made us resilient." Valtor's mandibles twitched, a predator's smile. "Resilience," he said, savoring the word as though testing its flavor. "An amusing euphemism for desperation." Ethan ignored the taunt, his mind racing. He needed to stall to buy time for the council to regroup. "If chaos is our sin, perhaps discipline is yours. Empires like yours break because they refuse to bend. Do you truly believe a galaxy united through fear can last?" Valtor tilted his head, his luminous eyes narrowing. "A futile attempt at persuasion," he said. "Your species will learn submission, not through reason, but through pain." He raised a clawed hand, and a shimmering hologram sprang to life behind him. The projection displayed a fleet so vast it seemed to stretch into eternity. Sleek dreadnoughts bristling with weapons, their hulls glowing with an eerie bioluminescence. Murmurs rippled through the room. Ethan's stomach clenched, but he kept his expression neutral. The Zorithans had just tipped their hand. Overconfidence, he thought, a weakness. "You have 30 Earth days," Valtor continued, "to surrender unconditionally. If you refuse, we will cleanse your planet of its chaos." He turned abruptly, his cape flowing like liquid shadow. As he strode toward the exit, he delivered one final proclamation: "Choose wisely." The chamber erupted the moment Valtor left. Voices collided in a cacophony of panic and defiance. Ethan remained rooted, his mind parsing the fragments of conversation. "They'll annihilate us. We should surrender before it's too late. Fighting is suicide." "Enough!" Ethan's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. He exhaled, the weight of leadership settling firmly on his chest. "Listen to yourselves," he said, his voice steady but firm. "The Zorithans expect us to fracture, to fall apart under pressure. That's how empires win, not with strength but by exploiting weakness." "And what's your plan, Grayson?" demanded General Marcus Wren, his voice like gravel. "We're outmatched in every way. What do you suggest we do? Roll over and die with dignity?" Ethan met Wren's glare with unflinching resolve. "No, I suggest we fight smart. The Zorithans see us as chaotic, undisciplined. Let's use that to our advantage." The room remained silent, tension crackling like a live wire. Finally, the council's chairwoman, Sophia Alaric, spoke. Her voice was measured, but tinged with weariness. "You've been brought here because of your experience with asymmetric warfare, Ethan. But this isn't a regional conflict. This is an interstellar war." "I know," Ethan said. "But the Zorithans aren't invincible. Empires like theirs thrive on order. If we disrupt that order, we force them to make mistakes. They're overconfident. That's our opening." Alaric studied him, her piercing gaze dissecting his words. "And what exactly do you propose?" Ethan hesitated, the enormity of the situation pressing down on him. "We need to wage a different kind of war, a psychological war. If we can make them doubt their superiority, we have a chance." Murmurs of skepticism rippled through the room, but Alaric raised a hand, silencing them. "You'll need a team," she said, "and you'll need to move quickly. We don't have the luxury of time." Ethan nodded. "I'll get started immediately." As the meeting adjourned, Ethan lingered in the chamber, staring at the hologram of the Zorithan fleet still flickering on the main display. The enormity of the task ahead loomed over him, a shadowy specter whispering doubts. He clenched his fists, forcing the fear down. Humanity had faced extinction before. This time would be no different. Later, in the quiet solitude of his quarters, Ethan sat before a holographic interface, his thoughts churning like a storm. Outside, the city sprawled beneath a dome of artificial lights, its skyscrapers reaching skyward as if defying the very stars. He sipped from a steaming mug of coffee, the bitter warmth grounding him. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. The hologram flickered, revealing Sophia Alaric's image. "We've secured initial approval for your strategy," she said. "But there's resistance among the council. They think it's reckless." "Of course they do," Ethan replied, his voice laced with dry humor. "Reckless is the only option when your back's against the wall." Alaric's expression softened, a rare crack in her composed demeanor. "You've got one chance to prove them wrong. Make it count." As her image vanished, Ethan leaned back, the weight of responsibility pressing into him like an iron chain. He gazed at the cityscape, his mind already forming the foundation of a plan. The Zorithans had declared war, confident in their superiority, but they didn't understand humanity. Not yet. "Let's show them what chaos really looks like," Ethan muttered, his voice a low promise to the stars. Ethan Grayson stood by the wide, curving window of the council chamber, his silhouette outlined against the sprawling lights of the city below. The night was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Outside, the sky was dark, its natural stars obscured by the dense web of satellites and orbital defenses that ringed Earth like a fragile necklace. His coffee had long since gone cold, the bitter dregs untouched as his mind raced, each thought branching into a web of uncertainty. The faint scent of ozone lingered in the air, a subtle reminder of the massive power conduits that thrummed beneath the chamber floor, fueling the planet's defense grid. Ethan's eyes narrowed, his reflection in the glass a pale, gaunt specter. The Zorithans thought humanity was weak, fractured, too unruly to mount a real defense. They'd underestimated chaos. Sophia Alaric's voice pulled him back to the room. "You'll need a team," she said again, pacing behind him. Her polished boots struck the floor with a precise rhythm, her sharp features illuminated by the glowing tactical display. "But we're not just fighting their fleet. We're fighting centuries of Zorithan supremacy. Their military is a hammer, Ethan, and we're glass." Ethan turned, his face shadowed but his eyes sharp, the steel of resolve cutting through the exhaustion in his voice. "Glass can cut, Sophia, if it's shattered the right way." She stopped mid-stride, her calculating gaze locking with his. For a moment the air between them felt like a taut wire, ready to snap. Then, with a subtle nod, she gestured toward the hologram hovering in the center of the room. A detailed schematic of the Zorithan fleet spun slowly, its glowing blue tendrils radiating menace. "The council approved your plan," she said. "You've got 28 days. After that—" Her voice trailed off, the unspoken weight of the deadline settling heavily in the air. "After that, we're dust." Ethan finished, his voice flat. The door hissed open and Ethan turned to see the first members of his team entering. Dr. Layla Trent stepped in first, her movements brisk, her sharp eyes scanning the room with the precision of someone used to solving puzzles. She was young for her field, barely in her mid-30s, but her reputation as Earth's foremost AI programmer preceded her. Behind her, Captain Arjun Malik strode in, his military uniform crisp, his expression carved from granite. He carried the air of a man who had seen too many battles and come away with too few victories. His presence was commanding, his voice a low rumble. "Grayson," Malik said, his tone clipped. "You wanted a war team. I hope you're not planning to win this with spreadsheets." Ethan smirked faintly. "No spreadsheets, just ingenuity." The last to enter was Commander Cian Dareth, her sleek silver exosuit glinting under the chamber's harsh lights. Her movements were fluid, almost feline, her gaze sweeping over the room with a predator's calm. As a defector from a Zorithan colony, her presence was both a boon and a risk. "I hope you all like impossible odds," Ethan said, his voice laced with wry humor. "Because that's all we've got." Layla raised an eyebrow, her voice dry. "Impossible odds and a deadline? Lovely. Tell me, what's the plan?" Ethan stepped forward, the glow of the hologram washing over his face. "The Zorithans are efficient, disciplined, and unimaginative. Their strength is their order, but that order makes them predictable. If we can disrupt their systems, confuse their chain of command, we can force them to make mistakes." "Disrupt how?" Malik asked, his arms crossed. "With chaos," Ethan said simply. "Psychological warfare." The room fell silent for a beat, the faint hum of the hologram filling the void. Malik's jaw tightened, and Layla glanced at Cian, her expression unreadable. "Chaos?" Malik said, his tone sharp. "You want us to win this war with pranks?" Ethan held his ground, his voice steady but firm. "Not pranks, disruptions. If we hit their communication networks, flood their systems with noise, they'll lose their edge. They're not used to improvising. They rely on precision. We take that away, and we give ourselves room to fight." Layla tapped her chin thoughtfully. "Their systems are highly encrypted, but if we can breach their tactical AI, we could plant a few surprises. It's risky, though." "Risk is all we have," Ethan said. He turned to Cian. "What about their fleet coordination? Weak points?" Cian's voice was low, her Zorithan accent still faintly audible. "The command hub for their fleets is heavily guarded, but they're over-reliant on centralized control. If you can sever the link between their commanders and their ships, you could create chaos." Malik snorted. "Big if." Ethan ignored the comment. "We'll call it Operation Trojan Signal. Layla, I'll need you to design a virus that can mimic Zorithan code. Cian, you'll provide the intel on their protocols. Malik, you'll lead the ground assault if we need to hit their hub directly." Layla nodded, already lost in thought. Cian's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Trust, perhaps. Malik, however, shook his head. "This is madness," he said, his voice hard. "You're gambling with billions of lives." Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "And what's the alternative? Roll over and hope they kill us quickly?" The tension between them crackled like static. Finally, Malik exhaled sharply. "Fine, but don't expect me to clean up your mess if this blows up in our faces." "Noted," Ethan said dryly. As the team dispersed, Ethan lingered by the hologram, his mind a storm of plans and contingencies. The faint scent of ozone still hung in the air, a reminder of the immense power surging beneath the surface. Outside, the city lights flickered faintly, a subtle pulse of life in the face of looming extinction. Sophia approached quietly, her voice soft. "You're taking a lot of risks, Ethan." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Risk is all we have," he repeated. "And if it fails?" Ethan's gaze shifted back to the hologram, his eyes hard. "Then we go down fighting." As the night deepened, the first phase of humanity's counterstrike began. Layla worked tirelessly in the underground labs, her fingers dancing over holographic interfaces as lines of code shimmered like threads of light. Cian pored over schematics of Zorithan ships, her sharp eyes catching patterns invisible to others. Malik oversaw drills with grim efficiency, his voice a whip that drove soldiers to perfection. And Ethan watched it all, the weight of their survival pressing against his chest like an iron vice. Chaos was humanity's nature, but it was also its strength. If they could harness it, wield it like a weapon, they might just stand a chance. In the shadows of the chamber, the faint glow of the hologram pulsed like a heartbeat. Time was running out, and the storm was coming. The dawn broke in hues of crimson and gold, the kind of sky that foretold disaster. Over the sprawling metropolis of New Helios, the air vibrated with tension. Ethan Grayson stood on the observation deck of the UESDC Command Center, his reflection a pale specter against the reinforced glass. Below, the city hummed with life, its denizens oblivious to the storm brewing above them. He could taste the faint bitterness of the black coffee in his hand, though it did little to calm the tempest in his chest. A low hum rattled the glass as the early warning system activated, red pulses flashing across the skyline. His comm device chirped insistently, dragging his attention away from the view. "They're here." Sophia Alaric's voice cut through the static, steady but grim. "Zorithan fleet, 24 dreadnoughts, countless frigates. They've breached the outer orbital perimeter." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. He turned sharply, striding toward the war table where his team awaited him. The air in the command room was thick with the metallic tang of overworked electronics and sweat. Holographic displays flickered, casting ghostly blue light on the tense faces of officers and analysts. Dr. Layla Trent was already at her station, her fingers flying across a glowing console. Captain Arjun Malik stood like a statue, his jaw tight, arms crossed over his broad chest. Commander Cian Dareth hovered near the tactical map, her silver exosuit reflecting the shifting lines of the hologram. "Report!" Ethan snapped, his voice cutting through the cacophony. Layla didn't look up from her work. "Their main formation is holding steady. They're deploying smaller craft for targeted strikes. Classic Zorithan shock and awe tactics. I've initiated the Trojan signal virus, but it'll take time to propagate." "Time we don't have," Malik growled, his voice a low rumble. "Their ground assault units will hit us within the hour." Ethan nodded, forcing calm into his voice. "Then we give them something to choke on. Malik, deploy your forces to reinforce our orbital defense hubs. Cian, prepare for infiltration. If Layla's virus works, we'll have a small window to disrupt their coordination. Make it count." As the room erupted into motion, a deep, resonant voice filled the air, dripping with cold malice. The command center's primary screen flickered, and the visage of Supreme Commander Scaris Valtor materialized, his glowing eyes boring into the room. His mandibles clicked softly, a predatory rhythm that made Ethan's skin crawl. "Humans," Valtor began, his voice like the grinding of ancient stone. "Your defiance is as pitiful as it is predictable. Like insects swarming against the storm, you flail in futility, clinging to your fragile illusions of strength." The room fell silent, the oppressive weight of his words pressing against their chests. Even the hum of machinery seemed to dim in the face of his presence. "You fancy yourselves resilient, adaptable," Valtor continued, his tone thick with contempt, "but resilience is nothing more than prolonged surrender. You call it chaos. I call it decay." Ethan clenched his fists, his nails biting into his palms. He could feel the tension radiating through the room, the unspoken fear that Valtor's words would prove true. "You think your primitive tactics amuse me?" Valtor's mandibles twitched into a mockery of a smile. "They do not. They only confirm what I have always known. Humanity is not a species to be reasoned with. It is a disease to be excised." The screen crackled as Valtor leaned closer, his burning eyes locking with Ethan's. "And you, Grayson, you will watch as your world burns, knowing that your defiance brought this upon them. 30 cycles of mercy. And now, only ash." The screen went black, plunging the room into a heavy silence. Ethan's breath came in shallow gasps, his body rigid. He turned to his team, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Let's prove him wrong." Moments later, the skies above New Helios erupted into chaos. The Zorithan fleet descended with terrifying precision, their dreadnoughts blotting out the sun. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning metal and ozone as Earth's orbital defenses lit up, streaks of plasma lashing out like vengeful gods. The distant booms of explosions rolled across the city like an unrelenting drumbeat. On the ground, Malik's forces scrambled to defend critical infrastructure. The sharp crack of gunfire and the shrill whine of energy weapons echoed through the streets as human soldiers clashed with Zorithan ground units. The invaders moved with chilling efficiency, their sleek, insectoid forms darting through the smoke like shadows. Ethan monitored the battle from the command center, his hands gripping the edge of the war table so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Layla, status on the virus?" "It's spreading," she replied, her voice strained. "I've infiltrated their secondary systems, but their firewalls are adapting faster than anticipated. We need more time." "We don't have more time," Malik's voice barked through the comms, punctuated by the roar of an explosion. "They're cutting through our defenses like paper. If that virus doesn't kick in soon, we're done." Ethan's mind raced, the weight of the moment threatening to crush him. His gaze darted to Cian, who stood poised like a coiled spring. "Cian, you're up. Layla, give her a backdoor into their primary hub. If the virus isn't enough, we'll take it down manually." Cian nodded, her lips a thin line of determination. "Understood." The infiltration team moved swiftly, their stealth craft cutting through the thick smog that cloaked the city. Inside the ship, Cian's sharp gaze flicked between the glowing readouts as they approached the Zorithan command node. The air inside was heavy with the metallic tang of tension, each breath thick and deliberate. They landed with a muted thud, the exosuits whispering as they activated. Cian led the team through the labyrinthine corridors of the Zorithan structure, her every sense heightened. The faint hum of alien machinery buzzed in her ears, the faint scent of scorched metal filling her lungs. They reached the core, a pulsing luminous orb that thrummed with an eerie energy. Cian's heart pounded as she approached, the weight of the mission pressing against her chest like a leaden fist. "This is it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the core. Layla's voice crackled through the comm. "Plug in the interface, I'll do the rest." Cian inserted the device, her hands steady despite the chaos raging outside. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the core flickered, its rhythmic pulse faltering. Back in the command center, Layla's face lit up. "It's working. The virus is integrating into their mainframe." Ethan exhaled, his body sagging with relief. But the moment was short-lived. A deafening roar tore through the air as one of the Zorithan dreadnoughts unleashed a barrage of plasma fire, shattering Earth's first orbital defense hub. The ground shook, and the air was filled with the acrid stench of burning debris. "Ethan!" Malik's voice crackled through the comms. "We've lost the hub. We can't hold them much longer." Ethan's chest tightened, the enormity of their struggle threatening to overwhelm him. But then amid the chaos, a faint flicker of hope. The Zorithan fleet faltered, their formations breaking as the virus disrupted their coordination. Ships collided in fiery explosions, their disciplined precision unraveling. The first battle was far from over, but for the first time, humanity had struck back. Ethan watched as the tide began to shift, his heart pounding with a mixture of triumph and dread. The Zorithans were down, but not out, and the storm was far from over. The command center reeked of sweat, burning circuits, and the faint metallic tang of blood. The air was thick with tension, each sharp breath of the personnel layered with the echoes of distant explosions. Ethan Grayson stood over the war table, the holographic map of Earth's orbit flickering erratically. The Zorithan fleet's precision had fractured, but their overwhelming firepower remained. For every dreadnought that faltered, another loomed, its shadow eclipsing humanity's fragile defenses. Layla Trent's voice cut through the chaos. "The virus has destabilized their command network. Frigate formations are colliding and their response times dropped by 40%. Ethan didn't look up, his eyes scanning the glowing projections. 40% isn't enough, he muttered, his voice like flint. They can still wipe us out. Shindareth leaned against the edge of the table, her breathing steady despite the chaos. Her exosuit bore fresh scorch marks, the faint smell of charred alloy clinging to her like an invisible cloak. Their fleet coordination is crippled, but their flagship, the Eternal Vengeance, is still feeding localized orders to their ground and orbital units. As long as that thing's operational, they'll keep regrouping. Captain Arjun Malik, his uniform streaked with soot and blood, barked from the other side of the room. "So, what's the plan? Blow it out of the sky with a prayer and duct tape?" Ethan's gaze snapped to him, sharp as a blade. Not quite, but close. He straightened, his mind already assembling the pieces. "We cut the head off the snake. If we take out the flagship, their chain of command collapses entirely. No fallback, no strategy." Layla frowned, the glow of her console reflecting in her wide eyes. "That ship's shielded by Zorithan dreadnoughts. We'd need to neutralize their firepower before we could even get close." Ethan began pacing, his boots clanging against the steel floor like a countdown. "We don't attack the dreadnoughts directly. We lure them out." Malik folded his arms, his dark eyes narrowing. "Lure them? You think they're just going to follow us like a pack of hungry dogs?" "Exactly," Ethan said, stopping to meet his gaze. "They're operating on fragmented commands. Their discipline is faltering. If we make them think there's a clear target, something too valuable to ignore, they'll chase." Cian tilted her head, her voice laced with intrigue. "And what target would be worth that risk?" Ethan's lips curled into a grim smile. Their pride. The room stilled, anticipation thick as smoke. Layla's hands hovered over her console. "You're going to have to elaborate on that." Ethan leaned over the table, his finger tracing a line through the hologram. "We plant a decoy signal, a fake transmission from a supposed human high command offering surrender. We make it look legitimate enough to bait them. Once they take the bait, we pull them into an ambush." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Ambush with what? Half our fleet's scrap metal, and the other half is barely holding the line." "We don't need numbers," Ethan said, his tone edged with steel. "We need precision. Layla, you'll rig the decoy to mimic Zorithan protocols just enough to trigger their attention. Cian, you'll lead a strike team to infiltrate the Eternal Vengeance once it's isolated. Your objective is simple: disable their command core." "And if the ambush fails?" Malik's voice was a growl. Ethan met his glare, unflinching. "Then we make sure we take them down with us." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing against every soul like a vice. Then, one by one, the team nodded. There was no room for doubt. Layla worked tirelessly through the night, her fingers a blur over the console as lines of code cascaded across the holographic display. The faint hum of machinery was punctuated by the rhythmic clatter of her keyboard. The scent of burned-out capacitors hung in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of adrenaline. She muttered under her breath, tweaking algorithms and cross-referencing Zorithan communication protocols. Across the room, Cian prepared her strike team, her movements precise and deliberate. She inspected every piece of gear, the faint whir of her exosuit audible as she shifted her weight. Her focus was unshakable, her piercing eyes scanning each soldier's armor with the cold scrutiny of someone who knew the cost of failure. Ethan monitored the preparations, his chest heavy with the dual weight of leadership and doubt. The faint ache of exhaustion tugged at him, but he shoved it aside, the taste of determination sharp on his tongue. This was their only shot. By dawn, the decoy signal was ready. The team assembled in the hangar, the cold air tinged with the faint scent of fuel and ozone. Ethan stood before them, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his chest. "This is it," he said, his gaze sweeping over them. "The Zorithans think they've broken us. Let's remind them who we are." The decoy transmission was broadcast, its fabricated tone carrying the faint desperation of a species on the brink. It didn't take long for the Zorithan fleet to bite. The dreadnoughts began to shift, their massive forms peeling away from their defensive formations to pursue the supposed surrender signal. Ethan watched the hologram as the trap unfolded, his heart pounding like a war drum. "Cian, you're up." Cian's strike team launched into the fray, their sleek, stealth-modified ship slipping through the chaos like a shadow. The battlefield was a symphony of destruction, the roar of engines, and the thunder of plasma fire blending into a deafening cacophony. The sharp tang of ionized air filled the cockpit, and the faint vibrations of near misses rattled the hull. As they approached the Eternal Vengeance, the ship loomed like a predator, its sleek lines and glowing weapons an imposing testament to Zorithan's supremacy. Cian's voice crackled through the comms, steady and calm. "Engaging infiltration protocols. Breaching now." The strike team penetrated the flagship's outer defenses, their movements fluid and practiced. The corridors were dimly lit, the faint hum of alien machinery a constant backdrop. The air was cold and sterile, carrying the faint metallic tang of recycled oxygen. Cian led the way, her senses sharp, her every step calculated. The team moved with precision, their breaths shallow as they avoided patrols and bypassed security nodes. The deeper they went, the heavier the air seemed to grow, the oppressive weight of the ship's power pressing against their chests. Finally, they reached the command core, a pulsating orb of energy encased in a crystalline lattice. The faint hum it emitted resonated through their bones, a haunting, otherworldly melody. Cian's voice was a whisper. "We're in position, initiating disruption." Back in the command center, Ethan and Layla watched as the Zorithan fleet faltered further. The virus had done its work, but the Eternal Vengeance still held the remnants of their coordination together. Ethan's fists clenched as he stared at the hologram, the tension in the room electric. Suddenly, a new alert flashed across the display. A massive energy surge emanated from the Eternal Vengeance, its weapon systems powering up. "They know," Layla breathed. Ethan's voice was sharp. "Cian, they're on to you. Get out now." But Cian's voice crackled back, firm and resolute. "Negative. I'm finishing this." The room held its collective breath as Cian and her team planted the final device. The core flickered, its rhythmic pulse faltering. Then, with a deafening roar, the flagship systems imploded, a brilliant burst of light illuminating the battlefield. In the command center, Ethan exhaled, the weight of the moment crashing over him. The Eternal Vengeance was down, its destruction sending shockwaves through the Zorithan fleet. But the cost had yet to be tallied. The tide had turned, but the storm was far from over. Ethan's gaze lingered on the flickering hologram, his chest heavy with both triumph and dread. The final battle was coming, and it would demand everything they had left. The blackened remains of the Eternal Vengeance floated in the void like a gutted leviathan, its debris spiraling into the cold abyss. Ethan Grayson stared at the holographic projection, the glowing red dots of the Zorithan fleet surrounding Earth flickering erratically as chaos rippled through their ranks. The flagship's destruction had shattered their coordination, but the remaining ships were far from defeated. In the silence of the command center, the hum of machinery felt deafening. Ethan's breath came shallow as he turned to face his team. Captain Arjun Malik's face was a mask of grim determination, streaked with grime and fatigue. Dr. Layla Trent's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted her console, her sharp focus betrayed by the dark circles under her eyes. Commander Cian Dareth wasn't there. Her absence felt like a phantom in the room, a hollow reminder of what had been lost. "They're regrouping," Layla said, her voice taut as a bowstring. "Their dreadnoughts are forming a defensive wedge. If we don't hit them now—" "We won't get another chance," Ethan finished, his voice cold steel. He pushed down the grief clawing at his throat. There was no time to mourn, not yet. "Grayson," Malik growled, stepping forward, his voice a low rumble. "This isn't just a battle anymore. It's a damned funeral march. What's the play?" Ethan turned to the tactical display, his jaw tight. "We finish what we started. Layla, activate Aegis." Her fingers froze over the console, the glow of the interface reflecting in her wide eyes. "You know what Aegis is proposing. It's not just targeting their fleet. It's targeting everything within their network range. The collateral is already here," Ethan snapped, his voice cutting through her hesitation. "Aegis warned us from the start. The Zorithans built their strength on control, and if we're going to take that away, we have to cut the cord entirely." "Cut the cord?" Malik barked, his fists slamming against the edge of the table. "That cord is a noose. If we unleash Aegis on their systems, we're risking a galactic-wide collapse. Planets under their rule could fall into chaos. Chaos, Ethan said, his voice a quiet blade. What they feared most. What they started this war to eliminate. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like ash. Ethan met Malik's glare, unyielding. This isn't about saving Earth anymore. It's about proving that their vision of order isn't the only way. Layla's voice broke the tension, a whisper but firm. Aegis is ready. Just say the word. Ethan hesitated, his hand hovering over the console. The moment stretched, heavy with the weight of countless lives hanging in the balance. He could feel the eyes of his team on him, their silent questions pressing against his chest like a vice. Was he ready to bear the weight of the galaxy's fury? He pressed the activation key. A pulse of light shot through the holographic display as Aegis engaged, its algorithms spreading like wildfire through the Zorithan networks. The room seemed to hum with a palpable energy, the faint crackle of static filling the air as the AI's reach expanded. "It's done," Layla said softly, her voice barely audible. The Zorithan fleet shuddered as Aegis took hold. Ships spiraled out of formation, their weapons systems firing erratically. Dreadnoughts turned on one another, plasma cannons igniting friendly vessels in a cascade of fiery destruction. Ethan watched, his chest tight, as the once mighty armada fractured into chaos. But the Zorithans didn't surrender. The lead dreadnought surged forward, its engines burning bright against the darkness. The ship's comm signal crackled to life, and the voice of Supreme Commander Scaris Valtor filled the command center once more. His tone was frayed but unyielding, like a storm refusing to break. "You think this is victory?" Valtor snarled, his words sharp as broken glass. "You've unleashed madness, Grayson. You've traded your world's survival for anarchy. Is this what humanity calls resilience? Is this what you die for?" Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady but laced with fire. "We die for freedom, Valtor. Freedom from your chains. Freedom from fear. You called us chaos, but chaos isn't weakness. It's life. It's growth. It's the spark that burns down empires like yours." Valtor's mandibles clicked, a hollow sound like grinding bones. "Freedom," he spat, the word dripping with disdain. "A fleeting illusion. Order is eternal. You may cripple our fleet, but your defiance will be ash under the weight of our resolve." Ethan's hand hovered over the comms panel, his mind racing. He could hear the distant roar of battle outside the command center, the faint rumble of explosions that shook the ground beneath his feet. The acrid scent of smoke seeped into the room, mingling with the sharp tang of fear. "Resolve," Ethan said, his voice low but piercing. "Let me show you ours." He cut the transmission and turned to Malik. "Target the lead dreadnought. Full force." Malik didn't hesitate. His voice rang out, sharp and commanding, as he relayed the orders. Outside, Earth's remaining fleet surged forward, their battered ships blazing with defiance. Plasma fire lanced through the void, striking the lead dreadnought with surgical precision. The ship's shields flared, then collapsed, its hull splitting in a cataclysmic explosion that lit the night sky. The command center erupted in cheers, but Ethan didn't join them. His gaze remained fixed on the display where the remnants of the Zorithan fleet were retreating, their once formidable armada reduced to scattered wreckage. The battle was over, but the war wasn't won. Layla approached him, her voice soft. "They're pulling back. We did it." Ethan nodded, but his chest felt hollow. For now. The aftermath was quiet, almost surreal. The once bustling skies above New Helios were empty, save for the faint glimmer of distant stars. The city below was a patchwork of flickering lights and darkened ruins, the scars of battle etched into its streets. Ethan stood on the observation deck, the cold air biting against his skin. Malik joined him, his expression unreadable. "You think they'll come back?" Malik asked, his voice gruff. Ethan's lips twisted into a faint smile. "Probably, but not soon. They'll need time to recover, to rebuild." Malik grunted. "And us?" Ethan looked out at the horizon, where the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and violet. The faint scent of ash lingered in the air, but so did something else, something lighter, almost sweet. Hope. "We'll be ready," Ethan said. As the sun rose, its light washing over the battered city, a sense of quiet resolve settled over the world. Humanity had faced the impossible and endured. They had turned chaos into strength, defiance into victory. And though the Zorithan Empire had declared war, they had underestimated the force they faced. Not weapons or technology, but the unyielding spirit of a species that thrived in the chaos of existence. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper carried by the wind. "Let them come. We've already shown them who we are." In the vastness of space, the remnants of the Zorithan fleet disappeared into the void, leaving behind only silence. But in that silence, humanity stood unbroken, a beacon of chaos and hope, burning brightly against the night.